Good evening and welcome to the Midtown Big Ideas Exchange. Hello to everybody watching us live on Facebook and Twitter. I'm Tas Mavrocordato, Chief Executive of B Midtown. B Midtown represents over 400 businesses here in central London, and two of them have joined us this evening, GroupM and WeWork. Our job is to bring together people and businesses of Midtown to drive long-term sustainable commercial and social growth. We do this through hyperlocal projects and services, and generally Midtown is experiencing immense investment and growth. We're anticipating a further 1 million square feet of office space coming through before 2020. The Midtown Big Ideas Exchange was created to celebrate the eclectic mix of brands and people that do business in this area. Now in its third year, we're delighted to still be partnering with the Evening Standard, who's our official media partner. It's my pleasure to introduce the chair for tonight's panel on the future of the workplace, Jonathan Prynn, Consumer Business Editor at the Evening Standard. Thank you.
Thank you, Tas, and thank you all very much for coming out on this cold November evening. And I think the format is we're going to have a panel discussion for about an hour and then throw it open to questions to you guys at about 8:10. And I think it's very appropriate we're having this discussion in this incredible building which started its life as the Prynn Assurance, a very conventional office building of the late 19th century, full of clerks and drones doing their stuff, and is now this amazing, or this part anyway, this amazing WeWork's shared space, and it's a fascinating subject. I work in a very conventional, old-style office. I sit at a screen for 9, 10, 11 hours a day in a building in central London, surrounded by my colleagues, which is exactly what journalists have been doing for the last 200 years, and we haven't moved on very far. And I was talking to my dad a couple of days ago about this event, and he said, well, we were talking about telecommuting and working from home and secretaries being replaced by robots and all that sort of thing about 30, 40 years ago. None of it has happened. So it'd be really fascinating to see tonight what our distinguished panel makes. Maybe it's a bit unfair to ask them exact predictions of the next 30 or 40 years, but perhaps we'll settle for 5 or 10. But before we start, I just wanted to give the panel a chance to introduce themselves, say a few words about what they do and their background, and then we'll kick right in.
Hi, I'm Emmy Rumble-Mettle. I am Director of Talent and Development for GroupM. GroupM is one of the world's, well, it is the world's largest media agency network. We look after Mediacom, Mindshare, Maxis, and MEC, or soon to be Wavemaker. So we have roughly 27,000 people in our organisation, and I look after the UK and the EMEA markets. And agile working or flexible working or being able to enjoy your life as well as have a great job is massively important to me on a personal level, as well as to the people that I serve. So I'm really glad to be here tonight and hopefully share some ideas on what good looks like.
Great stuff. Hi, I'm Alex Hirst. I am an entrepreneur, I suppose. I run a startup called the Hoxby Collective, and to expand a little bit on what the Hoxby Collective is, so you understand why I'm sitting here. We started the business in 2015, recognizing that the work structure as we know it and as we're used to it is flawed. 60% of people are unhappy in their work or looking for alternative employment. And that upsets me. I don't like to see people unhappy. I saw it on the train every day going into work, unfortunately, and on the way home. And it's not good for business either, because unhappy people are 10% less productive. So we set about creating a business model whereby everybody could love what they do, on the basis that if you're happy, you're more productive. And in fact, for business, 12% more productive. So we wanted to create an environment whereby people love what they do. And really, that stems from three things. One, having the skill and confidence to do what you do. Two, having a purpose, a sense of a reason why you get up in the morning and do it. And three, having the conditions to do it the way that you do it the best. And I think that's the real crux of the debate tonight. I think it's about those conditions. And what we did is discover that the rigidity of 9 to 5 and office-based working is a restraint, actually, for a lot of people. And it stifles creativity, and it makes people unhappy. A survey that we conducted recently cited 77% of people who felt that actually that rigidity had negatively compromised their life. So we created work style, which is an individualized way of working. You choose when and where you work. Now, at the moment, that means you work freelance. So what we do is enable lots of freelancers to work on their own terms. We just bring them together into an enormous team so that they can collaborate on projects and achieve more together than they could on their own. So Hoxby Collective is a community of freelancers working on their own terms, and we act as an outsource for other businesses across administration, marketing, operations, HR, finance, and innovation.
Thank you, Patrick. Oh, sorry. I missed Monica. Monica,
That's okay.
I beg your pardon.
My name's Monica Parker. I'm founder of Hatch Analytics, and Hatch is a future of work and change consultancy, and we use evidence to help support changes in the way that people work. I came to this work by a bit of a dog-legged process. I did study design in undergrad, and I went on to get my master's degree in social science at Queen's in Belfast. But in between, I was a homicide investigator for the Department of Justice, and I worked with men and women on Florida's death row. So no jokes about the comparison between criminals and the corporate world, but what I did learn was this really keen intersection between space and behavior, and also the impact that the communities that we surround ourselves with, the space that we surround ourselves with, can have on both our choices, our ability to make choices, our autonomy, our mental health, and even our freedom. And so I've taken those lessons from death row, and I now apply those in the corporate world to help people understand the impact that space can have on behavior. And our bottom line, our goal is to inspire positive action in people's work lives. So that's why I'm here today.
Okay, good evening. My name's Patrick Nelson. I work for WeWork. I oversee our real estate for Europe, Australia, and Israel. I wish that I had lessons to take from death row. I think that's an amazing line. I was fortunate enough to be involved in leasing this building. We have 17 open buildings across London and 23,000 members. Globally, we're 170,000 members around the world, building a community of creators, entrepreneurs, small and large businesses. We connect all of our members through a virtual platform, and we're now in 59 different cities. We're growing very quickly. So we're going to double in size in the next year, and we'll double in size in the year after that. So the kind of mission that we have is really to create this connectivity between people doing startups, doing small business, and just to really create a platform so that people's successes will be achieved through the office space, because we spend a lot of time at the office.
Thank you very much. I thought we might start the discussion tonight. I think one of the subheadings of tonight's debate was, is the office dead, or is it dying? And the traditional office gets a bad rep. If you look at the office, it's a lot of bored people doing boring things in a fairly horrible environment. But is there, turning it round, is there actually a lot of value in that, in the sense that it's bringing people together, there's social interaction, people get a lot of, the frustrations of everyday office life, but is there not a value in the social aspect of the traditional office, in a world of the gig economy and what was the phrase you were using before? Agile working, thank you. Agile working, where people are working more and more on their own. How do you see the value of the traditional office? Does it still have a place? Does it have a future? Alex, I think, why don't you kick off with that, since you're trying to get rid of the office?
So Hoxby's completely virtual. We don't have an office. We're 350 people in 29 countries, and most of our interaction happens online, in fact, all of it. So we have a community and a sense of community in an online space. So you could argue that we don't need an office. However, humans are sociable creatures, and I think that it would be short-sighted to to not have a way in which humans can come together, interact, and build in person. And particularly in person is where relationships are formed. And I think that is absolutely critical. And I think although we're entirely virtual, our client-facing teams are physically present with clients, and that is absolutely crucial to the ability to build relationships. We also host Hoxby homes, so our members will open the doors to their house, and other Hoxbys in the near vicinity will descend on them and bring food, and they'll all work together, where there's Wi-Fi and amenities and everything else that they need to do their job. So we're essentially creating pop-up offices. But I think what that means is that there is an acknowledgement of a requirement for co-working spaces, the places where people can come together, can collaborate. But I think perhaps more it's about collaborating with a sense of purpose or a reason for coming together rather than simply because it's 9 o'clock or because we all work in the same organization. I think it's about having centered discussions.
Emmy, what will be your take on this?
I love Alex's proposition. I think it's awesome. It's a sort of a utopian dream scenario for me. Our business is built on heritage. You know, our business has been around for over 20 years, and we're working very closely with people whose parents and parents might never have worked. And therefore, for me, the socioeconomic issues that people have in our society right now, people need to see what work looks like. And in an office, you get to see that 24/7. You don't get that if you're in a clouded environment. So part of me feels I wish I could take what Alex has got as well as what a corporate business that has a legacy also brings to the table, because then you've got that perfect utopia. Because without a workplace, you don't see structure. And I'm not saying, I think his business model is awesome because I would happily work there, but I've been working for over 20 years.
Somewhere where you can learn those softer skills that are so important
and then once you've got
in the workplace.
Take them to this guy with your gig economy. It's just awesome. But not from my business, please. Yes.
Patrick, presumably you would see a future for the office, even if it's shared space. But
of course. So, firstly, I agree with you that I think a lot of office space is a very, very disappointing experience. I think a lot of people, and I walk around a lot of office space, and a lot of the time I think it's, in truth, pretty depressing. But I also think that that's because it's being done wrong. And I think that if, a lot of these values of interaction, of community, and also you can really drive productivity to a point that people have to be happy, they have to be in an environment that's very encouraging towards that is incredibly important. But I think it's a lot of instinctive qualities that a lot of the office product currently fails to serve. People feel bored, they feel like they lack purpose, they feel sort of low energy. And I think if you can create an environment, and this is really very much the intent of what we're trying to create at WeWork, and I think have successfully done a lot of instances, if you can create an environment where people have community and they have a sense of purpose and they have interaction and it's a high energy, and people can be really productive, and we think a lot about that, not just sort of space efficiency, but space productivity, that will result in a strong community and a more productive environment. So I think the office, can achieve that. And I've got to say as well that obviously WeWork does co-working, and we do shared office space, but very much that's sort of the beginning. It's very much like the entry point. And so as people come into the office, we're providing an entire infrastructure, virtual backbone, so that they get involved in the community and they start to interact, and then they can jump onto the virtual platform and extend that on a geographical basis, but also across multiple different industries. So it's about 50% of our members from around the world are doing business together. So I think that the office is a great gateway, and it serves a lot of purpose in itself for community, for interaction, but I think it should be in many ways a gateway to a more successful, happy kind of work and life existence.
And productivity, of course, is an absolutely massive top of the agenda issue at the moment. You think a happy office space can increase worker productivity?
Without a doubt. I mean, productivity is something, I think what's happening is that they had a little bit of a one-size-fits-all. So you said you have open shared spaces because people collaborate in open shared spaces. Of course, that's true sometimes. And then sometimes people work very well if they meet in a conference room. And sometimes people work well if they meet in a space like this, which might have music and it might have beer and coffee, whatever it is. But if you provide a platform that gives multiple options, for people to step in and to sort of take what fits them and works well, then you can definitely facilitate productivity. But I think it's not easy. And I think it's ultimately the result of hundreds of little touches. We think about this the whole time, constantly. What are those hundreds of little moments that you can facilitate interaction in community and ultimately raise productivity, not just for their work, but also their wellness, their health, their physical health, and their mental health? All of that kind of ties together, and you have to have a platform multifaceted to provide.
Monica, how do you see the future of the office?
Space matters. I think you asked two questions. So you said, is the traditional office dead? Is the office dead? So the traditional office is definitely dead. It's dying, thank God. May rest in peace. Spirit of full disclosure, Hatch are WeWorkers, so we have offices in Soho and also in Melbourne, so we're fans of the product. But recognizing that space is only a facilitator for a culture that you're trying to create. And our experience and our research now, we've talked to about 40,000 people globally through our different survey tools, and we think that that effective, and I prefer not productivity because you can have busy fools, I prefer looking at high performance organizations. High performing and engaged environments and organizations have 4 elements, and you touched on 2 of them. So community and cause, absolutely purpose and community. The other is contemplation. I think that we've tended to over-collaborate a lot of our spaces, which is why people are overwhelmed. Susan Cain did her incredible piece of work around quiet. Introverts need that contemplation time. And then the last is control. Autonomy is what allows people to feel a part of something by choice, not by being forced into that. So even if they have purpose, even if they have a community, if they don't have the choice to opt into that, if they don't have the choice about how they work, a choice of the settings that they engage in, then you're not going to get that level of performance. And so I think it's really the combination of giving people those 4 elements and then a space to facilitate it, rather than saying this space will affect that change. I think space, Stuart Brand talked about what he called low road design. So why have so many incredible businesses started in basements or in garages? There's a great case study, Building 20, which is a terrible space at MIT Radar Lab that leaked, that smelled, that was hot in the summer and cold in the winter. And yet, it was an incubator for some of the most incredible ideas that MIT created. So space can be a facilitator, but culture will always trump space.
I think I fully agree with that. I think the big thing with all of these type community pieces, they have to be organic. So, and authentic. Yeah. And if you ever try and force any of those things, it's like that's an oxymoron. It doesn't work. You just have to have a space, a platform to like let it flourish, and then it can. But it has to be real. It has to be organic.
Yeah.
So you all seem agreed that the traditional dreary drudgery type office is probably gone, maybe. Not in the Evening Standard, I have to say, but...
I can help with that, John.
So if only we had the resources.
There's the 2 of us, we can fix it for you.
And so obviously expectations of what people hope to see or expect to see when they start work have changed dramatically. So I'd be keen to get your insights into what you feel the next generation, millennials, or whatever the right tag is of employees coming into the workforce. What are their expectations? What are they looking for? What are the sort of non-negotiable things that they hope to see in their work environment that maybe that we, or certainly I, wouldn't have dreamed of when I started in work quite a few years ago? Emmy?
Well, we've just done a survey, so of just the UK workforce, and out of 3,000 people, 71% of them wanted to have agile working. The demographic, though, was ironically 40 years plus that wanted it. And those under that age tended to want to come into the office. They want to be in a community. They want to be with people who inspire, engage, and drive them, I believe. Well, that's what we're seeing. But they do want an awful lot more than that. They want breakfast. They want the best coffee machines. They want the best sofas. They want the breakout areas. It needs, the office is definitely dead if you're thinking of the office, David Brent. Our office is like a work play space. We've got more games than we do I suppose, pods sometimes. It's about how do you inspire creativity. So they need an awful lot more than just an office space. And seeing this is so inspirational because, it's spaces like this that allow people who are millennials or any generation to genuinely do deep work. And that's what we're trying to look at for all of our people. So it's not freebies, it is the food, it is the lifestyle, it's the ability to go at lunch, go running, come back 2 hours later, or do yoga. We've had third space in, and we normally have quiet yoga for an hour every lunchtime. We have nutritionists in to look at performance and peak performance for work, peak performance for marathons. I mean, the list is endless. Every day there is something where there's free food and there's inspiration, and that's not going to stop. That's a big part of our budget.
Alex.
It's an interesting situation. I did a talk to a university last year, and I talked to them about what their expectations of work were. And the reality is they didn't really have much of a clue. They learn from what they see their parents doing. And really, the people who are coming into the workforce aren't going to be in a position to build an opinion of what's good or bad about it until they experience it. And that's going to take them a little while. And actually, it's the responsibility of the people who've been on the journey already to pave the way for a world of work for them that is going to be optimal. I think what we do know is that people like what they are comfortable with. So, and what I mean by that is we as consumers have evolved with the iPhone and with technology to enable us to do all sorts of things for ourselves that perhaps our companies, or the tech that we've been given by our companies, perhaps doesn't necessarily facilitate for whatever reason. And I think that as people grow up with tech and get used to living with it, so they will expect that to permeate their work life as well. And I think that companies have an obligation to make sure that their tech is as relevant to their workers as the workers have tech outside of work as well. I think that's an important thing for businesses to be thinking about.
Monica, what would you say has become the sort of...
I might be slightly contrarian to say that, okay, newsflash, millennials are humans. And humans want, I know sometimes it doesn't feel like it, especially if you have a kid that's a millennial, but they want the same things that everyone has always wanted. It's simply that now some of those elements are becoming non-negotiable. So if you talk to somebody who's 70 and you say, did you want to live a purpose-driven life? Well, yeah. Would you have wanted to have more control? Okay, yeah. Did you like having work friends? Absolutely. But now there's an expectation. And so really, I think it's less about millennials and more about this idea of ratcheted equilibrium. It's that this is the baseline, and then we ratchet it up, now that's the new baseline. We ratchet it up, now that's the new baseline. So everyone expects this level. It's simply that they never worked that way. So they never had this idea of the 50 years and the gold watch. And I think that there's an element, I thought that was an interesting point, of some of it, they don't appreciate what's coming down the pike, and maybe we don't either. A kid today who's just leaving high school will have 17 jobs in 5 industries. Let that marinate for a minute. This is not a job for life and a gold watch. 17 jobs in 5 industries. How are we preparing them to be that fluid? 70% of somebody who's just entering the workforce, the 70% of the OECD, their job will be lost to automation in the next 10 years. And so really, I think that's the impact we need to be looking at, the workforce and how we prepare those millennials for the level of change and disruption, and how can we build a resiliency to them. And that's where I think some of these co-working environments are terrific, because you're not losing your work family. It's simply something that's more fluid.
And do you think employers are keeping up with those changed expectations?
Absolutely not. No, absolutely not.
That's
and
my experience.
That's why I make a good living. Because
I would love to have somebody like you with us, because I think it's really hard when you're, for anybody who's working in a perceived classic or more traditional business, there are hierarchies at play that have been there since war immemorial. And to try and overcome those, we all go into a workplace feeling we're adult, going in on an equal level, but unfortunately the hierarchy is parent-child. And trying to undo that takes years. So it's great thinking that we can have agile working, that we can all work anywhere, anytime, but to undo those structures where people think if they've been in a business for 5 years or 10 years or 15, they are entitled to flexibility, as opposed to it's everybody's by entitlement, will be our biggest challenge.
And flexibility is why so many people are choosing to work for themselves. You know, the benefit of flexibility of being self-employed is what's giving rise to the gig economy. And you know, there'll be more people self-employed than working in the public sector within the next couple of years. So they are becoming a significant force, a significant workforce politically as well.
So Patrick, beyond ping pong tables and beanbags, what are the sort of non-negotiables or the expectations these days of a modern working environment?
I think if we took away beer, it'd be pretty unpopular.
I was going to say, do not mess with the beer, dude.
Sort of that.
Yeah, that would probably be poorly received. I think for sure there's, well, millennials, they're definitely humans, and I think they're very vocal. You know, millennials have a loud voice, and they also, mainly through sort of social media, I think that they're really able to convey a position that they have, and you know, they're probably a bit entitled as well. And so what they want, they're going to be very vocal about saying what they want. But I completely agree, what they're asking for and what they're now getting, because employers realize they have to help provide, all of these are very instinctive qualities. Like, if you want to be energized, you don't want to be lonely, you don't want to be bored, you want to be motivated, you want to have passion, like, of course, everybody wants these things. This is not a new thing, it's just a new voice. And so I think that, you know, that is definitely transitioning. And I think the really interesting point you're touching on is how employers are going to successfully attract and retain these really talented people, because you're going to have a more liquid labor market and people are going to transition between them. And I think what's also quite interesting is if you look at what's driving that more liquid labor market is ultimately, I think, the internet, and every single supply chain has been disrupted. And there's now a need in every single supply chain, whether it's manufacturing or information or whatever it might be, to have, there's greater transparency, and there's also greater ability to connect all of these different supply chains. So there's been a fundamental shift that you will have smaller companies that can be mobile, they can be virtual, and you know, and then you've got to combine that with, to get the best people into those companies, how do you attract them? And I think that's instinctive qualities, which is community, which is a sense of pride, which is a culture, and I think that requires a physical space.
Yeah. But I'll be a little bit of a skunk at the garden party and remind everyone that we're talking about knowledge workers, which is still that layer on top of all these other people who have to work. So we like to talk about the gig economy. It's so sexy. 60% of people involved in the gig economy don't want to be. You know, they have those jobs because they have to cobble together things to make ends meet. They're the 60%. Wow. So that's the Uber drivers and the people who are, you know, baking cakes here and taking photography and trying to make a living. So I think sometimes, you know, I'm involved in corporate real estate. I work with you know, FTSE 250 companies. I think sometimes we forget the people who come to WeWork. WeWork's not cheap. I mean, let's be honest. You know, the people that come to WeWork, it's excellent value. It's excellent value. I'm a user, but we have to remember that there's all these other people who are slogging away in their work environments that we're not even talking about. We're all talking about the knowledge workers, and there's manufacturing, and there's farming, and there's so many other people that get forgotten in a lot of these conversations about the future of work.
I think that's right, but I do think that we're at the very start of the conversation in that sense, aren't we? I mean, we've got to blaze a trail, haven't we, and inspire everybody else to kind of follow suit. And I think that's how we view it. It's kind of a let's see if this works. Let's test it. Let's pilot it. Let's inspire companies to think differently about how they treat their people and the conditions around which they engage them into work. And I think that somebody has to innovate, and it probably feels like it's our responsibility to do that where we can, and I think where we have a bit more flexibility. Okay.
Another obsession or challenge facing the millennial generation is obviously the cost of housing and the cost of transport. Now, here we are in Midtown, great location for employment and employers, but you know, housing is expensive in the center of town. Transport, where the housing is affordable on the edge of the city or into the suburbs, the commuting costs become prohibitive. So how do we square that circle? How do we make workplaces that are both close to where people live, but also appropriate to their functions and tasks. So that seems to be a major challenge for employers. Monica, you're champing at the bit.
No, commutes suck. You know,
exactly
commutes are just miserable. I'm lucky I walk to work. How many in here has a typical commute that's over an hour? I mean, it's just, that's not good for your health, man. Like, it's not good for you. You know, Transport for London says 20 million hours a day are spent commuting. There was a study done out of the University of Exeter, and they found that the typical London commuter, by the time they got to work, had the adrenaline and cortisol levels of a fighter pilot or a riot police officer on duty, okay? Riot police officer on duty, they show up and they get rubbish coffee and a cubicle. These people are getting psychological counseling, you know? They're getting great pensions, and this is what we're giving them. And I think that this is, if there was ever the boiling frog syndrome, it's this idea that we are supposed to go into a block of wood at a certain time and then wait to leave. And it is harming our performance, it's harming productivity. HP did a study, they called it the commuter zombie syndrome. They said that in preparation, that basically 2 hours after you arrive at the office, it takes 2 hours to reach baseline performance levels, and then steeling yourself for this horrible commute home, your performance drops off again 30 minutes before you leave. So that's 2.5 hours you're in the office, you're not even really working. And if there was one thing we could break the back of, it would be this notion that you've got to be present, presenteeism, you've got to be present in that space. I mean, you're not gonna ever, let's be honest, you're always gonna be in a central location. You're not gonna go out into the far-flung reaches.
We will be, but I think also it's a difficult thing because you're talking about geography, right? And it's sort of like it's real, it's physical. But I think we will always be central. We'll always be conveniently located near transport, but it will have many locations. So I don't know if people know this, but if you do, but if you have an office and a WeWork, you have access to every WeWork around the world. So just for example, in London, you have 17 locations that you can use areas like this, or conference rooms, or the bathroom, whatever you want. But it means that you have that flexibility and you have an optionality, and it means that you don't necessarily have to do Monday to Friday commute at rush hour. You can create flexibility into it.
It's an intentionality of using the space for a particular purpose, not just showing up to keep a block of wood warm.
Yeah.
But can I just say that I love that premise, it's awesome. But the reality is, in this room alone, how many of you are employed and have no option but to commute? So, you know, there are things that, yes, we want to change, but it's utopian. So it's sort of, how do we get those, if you are in a corporation that is historic, how do you get those seismic steps?
I don't think it's not so far-fetched at all to think that somebody has a base and that you create increased and improved flexibility. I think that's an employer's responsibility.
You've got to bear in mind, you're talking about businesses that hopefully are in their infancy or hopefully can move quickly. The majority of huge global corporations cannot move as quickly as you are stating they can.
AXA, Chubb, Aviva.
How long did that take, though? How long did it take?
Absolutely.
It didn't happen in a year.
It didn't happen overnight, but they are now, they're now applying it. So you said you'd love to have somebody like me. How do you change it? Evidence. Evidence of presenteeism is killing organizations. It's killing engagement, it's killing retention, it's killing performance.
And I get that totally, and I agree, because we see people leave. You know, we're a business where I think, like many companies, you see an average turnover year in, year out. Much of that must be atoned to things like the whole presenteeism culture, and I get it totally. But for anyone who's here and is feeling that you know, it doesn't always have to be the huge change of you not having a commute. It's what do you do in that commute, and how can you use that, for example, with your employer as a way of saying, actually, I'm working on my commute, so my hours start the minute I leave the front door. And that's already happening in Sweden. So you've got the commute being part of people's working days. So if you can't go all out, there still must be elements where we can try and improve our ability of having a work-life blend.
Yeah,
Alex.
For me, this comes back to, and presenteeism is something that we've conducted a survey on recently, so it's very close to our hearts. And I think the only way to really overcome it is to judge people by what they do, not by where they are. Or how long they're perceived to be working. It's got to be about a meritocracy where people are judged on their output, not their input. Now, that requires, some structural reform, but B, some pretty major cultural reform in the majority of organizations, I would say. But if you can overcome that and be judging people on their output, suddenly you're creating a level playing field for work. You're removing unconscious bias. You're creating equality of opportunity. And you're removing the gender pay gap, and suddenly everything is a level playing field, the likes of which work hasn't really seen before. So convincing middle management, middle to senior management, potentially, who knows, wherever the issues are around the ability to judge people by output rather than input, that's a really big challenge for businesses, but a key one, I think.
Does everybody know what presenteeism means? The idea that you need to be seen working in order to be seen as having value?
So can I just say, I'm with you. We're on this journey, though, as a big global corporation, of going down the route of having an acronym, because I think everyone needs an acronym sometimes. And the acronym we're trying to drive with our senior or middle leadership is focus on the results, not the people, firstly. So it's all about the results. And for that, the acronym, which is well known amongst people who do the agile working piece, is results-orientated working environments. As long as we're creating that for our people, a ROW environment, results-orientated working environment, that is all we are hoping to achieve in year one. So we're trying to do it in small bite-sized chunks. What I want is a revolution, but I need to payroll. Monica, I need to get you. Yeah, so yes.
You're revolutionary.
I think I need a revolutionary.
I think for all the concerns around the gig economy, I think what it does do is enable people to be judged, remunerated, and rewarded for their work, their output. When you're self-employed, you have a degree of self-accountability and skin in your own game, if you like, to deliver over and above, perhaps, what you might if you were employed. It's kind of my opinion.
We keep talking about the gig economy, and it seems to be a absolutely fundamental trend that's gathering pace in the workplace. Could you just sort of each of you sum up what impact the continued explosion in the gig economy is likely to have on workplace and office provision, looking 10, 20 years into the future, if I can get the crystal ball out again. Patrick, what do you reckon?
How are we going to see? I mean, I think it's a lot of these fundamental changes that are happening. If you're looking sort of, I think there's a lot of change that's happening, and one of the big things about the change is that it's accelerating. So to forecast 20 years into the future, and this is a bit of a sidestep, gets very tricky because what's happening, it's 6 months ago.
Let's rein it into 5. I'll give you that.
Into 5. Okay, fine. So you hold me to it. I think it will be more kind of transparent interaction between the different parties. I think we're going to see more and more of that it's not the kind of boundaries drawn between them get less sort of definite, and you'll see people switch between the different businesses, but you'll also see how they work together in more easy ways.
And in terms of demand for the services that you provide, I mean,
yeah, of course. This like speaks very, very happily to our business.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's sort of the whole piece. And I think just to sort of explain the WeWork model, we obviously have the real estate space, but we also providing a full series of services, and maybe most importantly, we have a virtual network and marketplace that people can kind of interact in that marketplace. So I think as we provide and get bigger, and we have greater accessibility and transparency in those, people will be able to dip their toe into it much more easily.
Monica.
So there was an interesting piece of research done called the Intuit 2020 report, and they looked at all of the factors that were going to drive the future of work and what would happen by 2020. And one of the terms that they used, it's not mine, I'll steal it, they called it the barbell economy, the idea that you'd have giant organizations that were then linked by all of these single providers, sole providers, or people involved in the gig economy. And I think that that's going to continue to grow. We'll still have the behemoths, but you'll have people who are connecting them. And actually, it's going to become much more porous, the idea that you might work for a company, stop working for a company, work for a company again, which used to be unheard of. When I look at how it will change, when I think of work, there's always three spheres, right? There's the physical built environment, there's the IT, and there's the people or culture. So from the physical built environment, more and more co-working. There will absolutely be spaces that, that allow this kind of interaction. Property in general is going to become much more liquid, much more fluid. It used to be that you signed a lease for 10 or 20 years, 20 years with a 10-year break. That model's gone. So now people are going to be going year to year, or even like here, month to month. So that idea of fluidity of space is going to become really critical. When we look at technology, it was 10 years ago this July that the iPhone was created. Technology is going to continue to facilitate a greater degree of that transparency and that porosity. It will also certainly lead to more disruption around automation. And then the cultural element, that's going to really require people to start focusing on different ways that they train themselves. So if you're having 17 jobs in 5 industries, if you're constantly involved in some different gig, instead of training to be a lawyer, you're going to train around skills clusters. And there's a great organization called the Foundation for Young Australians, and they've done a lot of work around this idea of skills clustering. So you'll learn to be a communicator rather than a lawyer or somebody in PR. And those kinds of long-term investment in training is going to get shorter and shorter and shorter, so that we can have that fluidity of the labor market to match the fluidity of space.
Amy, what do you...
The gig economy for us is challenging because we've seen things change over the last 5 years, and unfortunately for most historic businesses, they like having people as employees. So that mindset has been a challenge, but what's awesome for us is seeing a new generation come in who actually want to do more than one thing. So, you know, years ago you'd do, let's say, search or SEO, and now everybody wants to do a mix of everything. They want to do search, social, content. They want to do everything. They don't just want to do one thing. So our people are diversifying, and therefore it's forcing us to diversify. But legally it changes so many other things as well from an employment perspective, because when you're looking at the gig economy, it changes the way in which we're paying people, how they're perceived. Are they contractors? Are they freelancers? Are they hours? Are they yours? Who are they? So that piece, again, is a huge education piece for the whole HR landscape. And I don't think global corporations that are historical are ready for that. They like the traditional structure, so we need to mess up the neurons a little bit. But it's quite exciting.
Alex, so you built the business on the back of the gig economy, I guess.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating, because I think what we're talking about with the gig economy is individualization, I suppose, and people being able to have multiple strings to their bow and to be remunerated in different ways, which gives them variety, gives them a great deal of stimulation and an ability to live more holistically. And I think, to touch on a point that Monica made earlier, I think what you're going to see is people within the gig economy will want choice, and environments like this give choice. They scratch the itch of variety, and I can tell you, working from home every day is not actually as good as it sounds. It has its bonuses, but I crave variety. I'll go out and find a different space because you need that stimulus, that something that you get from the environment. But that is personal. That is different to everyone, and I think what we'll see is more innovative, different spaces, more variety, more options for people, and that's fun. The other thing is that technology is evolving, and a lot more wearable tech in the future. Who knows what that might mean, but hopefully it will mean you won't have to sit at a desk like this and develop bad posture in the neck and have to see a chiropractor for 3 years. So maybe there's an opportunity to build more healthy sort of work environments where you're more exposed to nature, or you're able to stand and communicate or exercise or interact in a different way, and live a more hopefully we can use technology to connect again a little bit more with the world around us. I think that's where things get really exciting for me, and potentially for workspaces in the future.
Okay, thank you. Moving on, I've in the last few months, I've written stories about 2 absolutely huge statement headquarter developments, each with a slightly different, or very different takes on what they want from their employees. So we had the Google headquarters up at King's Cross, which has got absolutely everything in-house, free food, free drink, the running track, the gym, the sports hall, you name it. Once you're through the door, you don't have to leave, you barely have to go home. And then you've got the Bloomberg office in the city, which has a very different take. They have very limited in-house facilities, particularly on food. They expect their people to go out and contribute to the local economy by spending in restaurants and cafes and sandwich shops and maybe bars even. So I'd like to ask the panel, are you Googlers or are you Bloombergers on this issue?
We're the halfway house.
You're not allowed to say that.
We're the halfway house, so we're definitely more Google than we are Bloomberg. We'll never become a Google. We want our people to have a work-life blend. And I think to Google it would be a little bit too much of a stretch for the whole of our demographic. It would only suit a few. So we're the halfway house, but we've got everything in-house. So from...
Did you provide free food and free...
We have free breakfast, we have free lunches. We don't do anything after 3 unless it's alcohol. But yes, we have free alcohol. There's a lot free.
This office.
We have, all of the fitness things are free, all of the meditations are free, all of the early morning HIIT sessions are free. There's an awful lot that's free. So we want people to feel enticed to come. All of their tech is free. Everything is given from day one. So yes, we want people to work hard, but we do want them to have.
Do you think Google take it too
life.
far? There's sort of almost a sort of cult-like. Some people say it's almost a cult-like existence.
I wouldn't want to work in that sort of environment, and I think it's quite. One of the big challenges for us, which is why we've gone down the halfway house route, is mental stress and anxiety is a big issue across the media industry. And I do think if you're imposing you stay in the workplace, it tends to not help that mental anxiety. So for us, it's about investing in that piece, which is about going back out to nature. So a lot of what we do for our people is how do we get them outdoors? How do we just do stuff that is natural as opposed to contrived? And I'd like to push that agenda more aggressively, I think.
Alex, what do you, are you in the Google camp or the Bloomberg camp, or probably neither? Probably neither.
Yeah, well, I think I believe very much in reciprocity, in that there's no give without some take, and I think that whilst I think the intention is good for Google to provide for its staff, I think there's almost it can create the kind of adverse effect culturally of, hang on, is there an unspoken expectation now because I've had a free lunch and there's no such thing as a free lunch? So I feel like maybe that sits a little bit, so I'm a little bit uneasy with that. I think it's admirable, however, to try to create something that is moving things along from where we've been. And I think building on where we've been is one thing, but for me personally, I think there needs to be a slightly more revolutionary mindset from companies and how they foster a culture within the walls of their organisation.
Monica, what do you think?
Google or a cult? Yes, and I question. Yeah, and I question the altruism, frankly. I know the head of corporate real estate who used to work there. The size of the plates that they use in all of their food services are specifically a size that says this means they'll eat for a certain amount of time and then go back to their desks. People self-select into it, so certainly it suits a certain demographic, but the Googles, the Facebooks, keep in mind, these are the businesses that said, we will pay for you to freeze your eggs rather than encourage you to figure out how to be a mother and come back into the workforce. So I'm not buying that, this is all about the employee. This is about a bottom line driver. I think I like Bloomberg's approach in that they say we want to contribute to the local economy, we want people to leave. To be fair, Silicon Valley, a standout is Intuit, and they also feel the same way. They try to minimize some of those benefits to get people moving outside of their space, but no, I'm not convinced with the Google model.
Patrick, what do you?
I think for both of these, the main criticism is that it feels like, from the comments and the way it's described, is that it's restricting options. So if Google provides everything, but if people in that instance feel like they're restricted from going out to lunch, that's not right. And if people are
I don't think they're locked in exactly, but or maybe they are.
Yeah. Not by wall. No, sorry. But I think it's about options, and it's about knowing that people, even if people want to eat out 4 days a week, maybe they want to eat 1 day a week, and that might change, and you're going to have lots of people in a space and organization where that will vary. So I think you want to create a platform. Both, I think, have great benefits, and I agree with Alex. They're thinking forward. They're thinking, okay, well, we can provide. But just because you give something, I think you've got to make sure that it's not, it has real free choice. And that optionality is what's the key piece.
And is Mike Bloomberg right? Does a major employer have a kind of moral obligation to be contributing to the local economy in which they are situated? Amy, what do you think?
I believe so. We give our employees money on a card to make sure that they can spend within our area. So I definitely think you've got a moral obligation. And I think actually that's more of a human values piece. It's an ethical piece that I think hopefully unites people when they join, rather than it being a one-size-fits-all, you're only eating Cheerios today. I think I might be quite cross with that if I was told every day what I was allowed to eat or do. So yeah, I'd go down there, support the economy.
Okay, thank you. Another increasing aspect of the modern workplace that might be interesting to touch on is the healthy office, the healthy workplace. I've certainly worked in workplaces where you come out at the end of the day and you've been breathing that stale air and looking at those grey walls, and you've been sitting there eating the rotten food from the canteen, and you don't feel so good at the end of the day. So how much of an obligation is there on employers or on workplace providers to be physically responsible, I suppose, for the well-being, the physical well-being, as well as the mental well-being of the people that work for them? Is that absolute obligation, do you think, Patrick? What do you think?
Well, I think physical and mental well-being are obviously incredibly interlinked. There's no denying that. So, we think about it a lot. At WeWork, we've just rolled out a concept called Rise by We, and we have an app. And if people want to do boxing in the morning or yoga at lunch or whatever it is, we provide all of that as an option. I think it's just for everybody's personal well-being, the well-being of the community, of the company, all of the above. You have to have a kind of mental and a physical piece. Central locations, you have access to all of that. We like to make it really convenient and bring it in as an option as well.
What sort of things?
Well, like I said, the boxing and the yoga, you can do that type of stuff. And then also we have sort of groups. Through the virtual marketplace, we'll have a lot of groups that will say, hey, we're going to go for a run over lunch, we're going to run into work in the morning, whatever it might be. Those groups can get together, and you allow that to kind of flourish. So I think, again, you create a hotbed for it, you support it, you encourage it, and if people want to step in, you just make it very easy.
Monica, would your advice be?
I think that we ask this question just as you posed it. Is there an obligation? Does the employer have an obligation? And we've got no one that doubts the impact of good mental health, good physical health on the performance of the organization. So they're absolutely agreed with that. Where we get a real, and I would say it's split almost 50-50 between people who believe that they have an obligation to support that. And some of the resistance to the obligation is, well, this isn't a nanny state. You know, if someone wants to be heavy, if they want to smoke, that's not my business. And others say, well, when did I become responsible for every aspect of my employees' lives? The folks that say that they believe in supporting it, and I would put myself in this camp, is that people spend more awake time in the workplace than they do anywhere else. So if you, as employers, are not leading that, then where else are they supposed to sort of get that input? So absolutely, I think it's critical. Stress-related illnesses are costing the economy billions. So we really have to start focusing on how to reduce that stress. And I keep going back, I'm beating a bit of a drum, that one of the key elements to doing that is giving people more autonomy so that they do not feel that sense of time paucity. They will not feel as crunched around time if they have choice on how to spend it.
Alex, in the cloud, how do you get people staying fit in the cloud? Up
and down the stairs if they live at home. Over 2 stories. I think it's a really interesting point because for organisations to provide the equipment for people to exercise and stay physically healthy is good. But I think that the propensity for employees to use that equipment is really driven by the culture. And actually the culture is what will drive overall performance, happiness, and I guess well-being, because really that'll contribute to mental health more than anything, I guess. And if there's a culture, a positive culture around being healthy and being part of a healthy group, then that brings positivity around the use of gym equipment and stuff like that as well. But I think it can go against you. You've got a culture kind of has to underpin everything, and your rationale for implementing physical equipment and stuff like that. If I had an organisation that had it.
What do you provide?
We've got gym memberships for about 9 different gyms across London, so anybody can opt in. We've got communities of people who've got sessions that they run, and they're initiating that themselves. And obviously, whilst I'm the group company, the agencies that we also look after, so for example, one of our agencies, Wavemaker, has something called a Thrive Project, and they've got a fund of money that they will give to individuals for them to spend on whatever they want. So it's about opting in. I'd go back to Monica's statement, the nanny state piece for me is not healthy. So if you want it, it's there. If you don't, that's fine. If you want to leave at lunch at, let's say, 11:30 and you don't come back till 2 because you're training for a marathon, that's fine as well, as long as it benefits you. If it benefits you, it benefits us. So that's the agenda that we drive.
What about the mental health side?
Mental health is massively important for us because we see higher levels of anxiety amongst the millennial community. And the exercise, the health piece is hugely important in just helping them have a better work-life blend and also helping them have a better esteem about themselves. So for us, we drive that agenda aggressively for them, but we would never force them to go and do anything they didn't want to do.
Alex, how can you provide support in your more sort of virtual setup? Is there any mechanism for helping people?
It's a work in progress, so we're still relatively new, but we're forming partnerships with organisations that will enable our members to access facilities locally at discounted rates and that kind of thing, which will help them access the opportunity to exercise and that kind of thing. But fundamentally, I think being a meritocracy and giving people flexibility helps with their mental health fundamentally more than anything. I think that choice and control and autonomy is what is enabling our members to work happier and healthier anyway.
I think some of these programs can be used against people, and I think that's one of my cautions, is that sometimes businesses will say, well, look, we've got the mindfulness training and you've got yoga, so I don't want you being stressed. Like, You know, don't come to me and tell me you have we've already provided to you. Yeah, we've ticked the box. You should fix yourself. And so I think that's where I get nervous when people sort of roll out these mindfulness or these well-being initiatives without really tracking whether that's improving absenteeism. Is it improving people's long-term disability leave? And because if it's not, then obviously it's not working.
And from a corporation perspective, we wouldn't roll out something like that because, again, for me, it feels as if you're ticking a box. And to do that, you may as well just go one size fits all, just come in 9 till 5. It just goes back and totally denigrates the whole premise of flexible or agile working. So it does need to be for the right person, which is where the human touch comes in. You know, if you're with people every day, you know who needs what. You should know who needs what, or their line manager should, and then you know what to supply them with. So it should be bespoke.
It does seem incredible. When I started in the workplace in the mid-80s, late 86, 87, newsrooms were just, you could hardly see from one side to the other because of the fog of smoke. Every morning in morning conference, people would spark up. It just seems remarkable now, doesn't it, that level of sort of indifference, I suppose, to other people's health and colleagues and so on was just absolutely the norm 30 years ago. Seems extraordinary.
As was, we'll do something topical, the Me Too, as was sexual harassment. Yeah. So that was the norm. And now people are going, that actually might have negatively impacted my mental health. Yeah. So there are a lot of things where people go, maybe we should peel back that layer and really question whether that was right for a group of individuals.
We've come a long way since 1987, that's for sure. Thank God. On a similar subject, or related anyway, sustainability. How important is it that buildings are not just, or offices are not just nice environments and nice places to work and you feel healthy and you feel fit and sane and everything? How important is it that they are also sustainable, that they're environmentally, their footprint is as small as it can be, you're not damaging the environment? How important has that become in the way we design offices and design workplaces and for employees? Is that a big factor now, Emmy? Or?
It comes up every 18 months. We do an employee survey across 27,000 people, and it comes up time and again, certainly for the EMEA markets, that sustainability is really important. So the CSR piece is vital. I would hate to sit here and say I'm an expert. I'm so not. We have a team of people who work on those issues. But ironically, the issues are driven by our workforce. They see the things that they don't like. They comment on it. So luckily, you've got your litmus test in your community that constantly drip feeds you what you need to put right. Do we do it all? No. We try and consistently hit 3 things every quarter and then keep that going because it's so easy to slip. But we're not awesome at it at all yet.
Patrick, what do you?
It's important. Environmentally sound buildings, I think, are important for 2 reasons. First is that you just general approach to sort of environmental pieces is you got to have like a grassroots approach where everybody gets involved and understands that this is an important factor. So that's things like, and we're trialing it now, but like getting rid of plastic cups. You know, not having like changing the world immediately, but it's sort of a thoughtfulness which is really important. And then I think when you're actually looking at commercial office buildings, they do have a pretty big footprint and a pretty big impact. So you want to go on the kind of larger topics as well. I think with respect to the standards for buildings in terms of environmental compliance, I think these are quite a lot of it's a box ticking exercise. I think some new builds is great. They sort of, it's become important, but I think the kind of getting gold star rating or whatever it might be is definitely box ticking. And we recognize that this building previously used to house less than half the number of people. And so I think by having higher density, you actually have a much, much greater impact than having like a slightly different electric panel. But so I think there needs to be a little bit more thoughtfulness about it, but I think the intent is right, and the intent is right doing it from grassroots and from a higher level as well.
And Monica, what?
Absolutely. The most sustainable building is the one never built. So, we need to reuse, we need to increase density. One of the things that I really respect that WeWork's trying to do, and I know that that's at least what people have said about the purchase behind Meetup, is to have spaces that are being used as often as possible. So, you know, you go to a Canary Wharf or to the city, and all of those buildings are don't have people in them in the evening. Many of them still have lights on in the building. But one of the key elements is that really the heart of sustainability is about behavior. So you can have the greenest building possible, but if people don't turn the lights off, if they don't recycle, if they continue to use plastic, et cetera, if they drive into work, those are all behavioral choices. And so at some point, we have to question our own actions and how they impact sustainability, as opposed to sort of always looking at the bigger organization to fix it for us.
Alex, you're nodding. Very sustainable.
Although those servers, imagine.
Well, yeah, let's not go there. We're all using those.
Just kidding.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything the guys have said. I think essentially as humans, we're trying to improve the world that we all live in, aren't we? And I think maybe with less pressure on urban centres, we'll see a little bit of you know, fewer people commuting, and a little bit of an evening out of our consumption and usage, and hopefully a dilution of that through a little bit more home working and working within a lower carbon footprint individually. Maybe that will help us overall as well.
I mean, how do you...
I answered first.
Oh, you answered first. Oh, sorry. Sorry. You can answer again if you like.
When you asked me, I wanted to just go, Patrick. So, yes, it's not my forte, sustainability.
We haven't touched specifically on technology and how the ever-increasing pace of technological change is going to change the workplace, work practices, the office, the physical construction of office space. Emmy, what do you...
Well, so 70% of basically all of the properties that we lease are leased on the premise of 70% of the workforce being in the place at any one time. And that's because of the tech. The tech enables us to do our job anywhere, which again ties back to the fact that tech has been awesome, but tech is also a real bugbear for the whole mental health and anxiety challenges we're also facing. So it's sort of your hero and also your crippler. So for us, it's about how can we hopefully park tech when it comes to a certain time in the night, or I think people work to pulses. You know, I tend to work from 4:30 in the morning, and I'm normally comatose by 4 in the evening. But I work with people who start at 11 and want to finish at 7. So for me, tech enables people to pulse at the time that works for them. And I can't see that changing. And in fact, tech will drive a quicker agenda for us as an organisation to get more agile. But it is about knowing what your pulse is and knowing what your people's pulse is and allowing them to deliver on that without worrying about the whole presenteeism or core working hours or contracted hours.
Alex, you're already at the cutting edge of the technological revolution.
Trying. Yeah, I think...
how does it feel riding the wave?
It's great. Tech's great when it works, isn't it? I think most people are concerned and talking about AI and the effect of AI on the jobs we will do, I think. But I think what we'll see from AI and the way that we're starting to implement it is to take care of things that are process-driven, and really what that's doing is taking away potentially a manual data entry job, someone sitting at a desk doing something manually that can be automated. But that doesn't necessarily mean that that person loses their job. It means that they can apply everything that they know to work in a different way. So work with technology. So tech can automate stuff. Humans can think in multiple directions, take in things that they see, they learn, they hear, and apply that knowledge in different ways. So I think we'll adapt like we always have. I'm not saying that was necessarily the question, but I think it's a hot topic at the moment.
Answer, though, so.
Yeah, it's a hot topic.
Yeah.
It's a hot topic.
So Monica, tech master or servant?
Ooh, I actually spoke at a conference called Masters in Robots. I think in some ways it maybe doesn't matter. Even if robots become our overlords, we'll still be humans. At the end of the day, we'll still be humans. And I think that what we need to, whether it becomes a great facilitator and it automates heaps of the work we do, I think there's two elements. The one is that we've got to get a lot better at being human. So I think we need to start focusing on those very things that make us human, that can't be automated. Empathy, communication, we've got to get better at unlearning. So the idea that you can't just layer new learning one on top of another. We've got to be able to treat each other with more vulnerability. And I think we've got to cultivate a really active sense of curiosity and awe so that we can manage all the changes. And then I'll throw just a little hand grenade. I also think we need to have some serious conversations about universal basic income. I think we've got to start talking about the idea of, okay, that's okay if half the jobs go away. Why does that matter? Tax the robots and start allowing people to go back and be home health care workers for their elderly family, to focus on the things that matter. And maybe our whole identity being wrapped up in employment can be questioned, and we can use this new age of automation to allow us to become more human.
Some big issues there.
I was thinking more about tech like automatically submitting a ticket in WeWork, which I don't think is ever going to become our overlord. But I think tech is like, and I'm without kind of jumping in, like way into the future as tech can take over with robots. But just right now, I think real estate, and I'll just talk to WeWork, real estate is way behind in involving tech. And I think there's a couple of really big instances where there's hardware in the world that doesn't have any software connected to it. And I think it's cars, it's houses, and it's office space. And I think that's going to change, and it's going to change pretty quickly. But we often describe to landlords, I'll say that you build hardware, you build a building, and we're the software that sits in that building that interacts between the hardware and the user. And I think we're going to see that in cars and houses. And I think in office space, we're starting to really provide that. And it means that we can automate a bunch of stuff, which helps free up time. Every building that we have has a team of community managers and stuff. Their function is to really interact with all of our members to make sure that they're happy, but also to help connect them. And if it means that they don't have to worry about somebody asking about a conference room, all of that can be automated. It allows them to focus on those like human characteristics, which are connecting community and that type of thing. So I think there's a great space for technology today, and real estate is way behind, but I hope that we're helping catch it up a bit.
Okay. Well, look, we've covered an incredible range of topics there. So I think the plan is now to throw it over. There's a microphone doing the rounds for anyone who has any questions, either for the whole panel or someone specifically, if you want to pick up on something they said. So fire away, hands up.
I'll ask a question.
Please do.
Thank you. If you don't mind, I've got a question for everyone on the panel, just a quick one. One for Alex is, in the introductory speech that you gave, there was an indication that there's an increase in office space, or an anticipated increase in office space. So it's trying to understand how that complements the gig economy, or indeed challenges the future and actually reinforces the current status quo. One for Monica, if you don't mind. There was a discussion around presentism, and using the old adage of out of sight, out of mind. Businesses continuously go through change, and during this state of change, redundancies, and how can we how does that hinder or reinforce the presentism that you talked about? And then,
sorry to interrupt. Shall we deal with those two before we go too far and then forget what Alex was initially asked?
Great questions. I think, so to talk about so WeWork are opening a huge number of additional units and providing a facility that is not what I would call office space. So I think what they're doing is creating work environments, workspaces. And I think that what that's doing is giving the growing gig economy a place to go, to connect, to work, to get the variety that they are looking for, and the network that they are craving, I suppose, for want of a better word. Being self-employed and being an individual, the thing that you want is to connect with other people and get a sense of community, and so you join organizations like Hoxby, or you work at places like WeWork. So I think what WeWork are doing in growing the overall square footage is providing a flexible space for those people who are switching out of traditional employment into self-employment.
So presenteeism, when I advise corporates on how to banish presenteeism, I'm not recommending that they send everybody to be home workers. What I'm talking about is the ability for people to work anywhere, anytime. And the expectation is that they would not disappear. You simply wouldn't necessarily see them working all the time, but you would still interact with them through a community. But you make a really, really good point. So one of the most longitudinal studies of home workers, so these were people that were almost fully based at home, was done out of Beijing. And it was almost a 20-year study, and they looked at people that were insurance adjusters. So it was something that was very easy to judge the output, so you could measure everybody's output. And what they found was the people who worked at home, their output was better, their reviews from people who called in were better. By all metrics, they were improved compared to their colleagues, except for one. They were not promoted as often because they were not seen. And so I don't believe in sort of this idea of somebody being fully home-based. I think the key, if you're part of a corporate, if you're part of any organization, then there are elements when you need to be seen, but it's not an expectation that if I don't see you, you are not working. And so that's what I mean by banishing presenteeism.
Thank you. If you don't mind, just two quick ones. For Patrick, I think there was a discussion around yoga in the mornings or boxing in the morning and at lunchtime. Looking at a very flexible gig economy, why can't those activities be available any time of the day to any of the individuals? And finally, for Emmy, if you don't mind, my understanding is you work in a very traditional environment and a traditional structure. Talking about certainty that you would want from the traditional structures, like gold, investors go to that in terms of certainty. What would you like to see the gig economy give you to give you that certainty to work towards that environment?
I'd like to answer that, but I want to give you, do you want to answer yours first? I've got the memory of a gnat. So you want to know, just to clarify again, sorry, you want to know what the corporate world
would like to see from the future of work,
yep,
to give you the certainty you want to start working towards that future?
It's really simple. It's mind changes. It's a working mindset that needs to change. So when I say traditional, we're so not traditional. But when I compare us to Alex or to any of us on the panel, apart from our organisation, we would be seen as traditional. So the only way of changing that is mindsets, and is by being a little bit radical, because if we do it just step by step, it's not going to be impactful enough. So realistically, everybody needs a moniker, and I'm going to be speaking to her later. But I do believe you need someone or a board of people who are prepared to buy into the fact that things will change. So if you don't move with it, you're actually going against it, and you're not going to be able to generate as much revenue, and our organisations will see seismic losses. And I think you look across the media industry at the moment, and we are seeing those losses. So it clearly is time for change. So it's a mindset shift, and I think the more people lose revenue or accounts or business, the more inclined you are to move closer to a gig economy-esque business where it's all about the output, it's all about the skill, it's no longer about the infrastructure and worrying about people, it's all about worrying about productivity.
And then the question you asked was about why we offer sort of yoga and breakfast, just a breakfast and lunch, or boxing and breakfast and lunch. So we offer classes throughout the day, but we've only recently been able to do that just from a practical point of view, because now we have a large enough community in London that we can say, great, we have classes, we have instructors come in, and we have space that gets used and classes that are full. I think, and why I also said that one of the ways that people can exercise is we have a marketplace and a network that people can say, great, I want to exercise at this time, in this place. One of the reasons that we're looking to grow, and this is just an example of how the benefit of the greater network, as the network gets bigger, the benefits associated get bigger. So it's entirely kind of practical. Once we have 50 locations in London and we're comfortable saying, great, we can have classes all throughout the day, then we look forward to it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Gentleman there in the maroon top. That's you, yeah.
So one of the topics in Fly was about innovation. One of the topics was about innovation, and you've spoken about, and I can understand how cafe and co-working environments will help with this knowledge section of people who want to be developing innovations, but how do you foresee working environments affecting large organizations that do engineering, for example, where you have manufacturing floors and then you have various other tiers within a company? How can they develop innovations? And is that kind of working space related, or more culture and kind of overall goal orientated?
Patrick, that sounds like one for you.
Yeah, so we have conversations with a lot of companies that are multifaceted, and they have, for example, industry or engineering or whatever it might be. First of all of those companies have a component of office space, and usually that office space is seriously overlooked. So if you want to talk about productivity that takes place in office space, then certainly we look and have a lot of information that we can apply to help improve that. I think there's another piece that you look at it and say, Modigliani writes about the multiplier effect. If you create an environment where people are thoughtful, innovative, then that has like positive implications, a multiplier effect for the benefit of other people. You know, if they do allocation of resources in the right way or innovation, however it might be, those things have positive repercussions. I think actually within, you know, I think maybe you're talking about stuff like engineering. Let's say you go into logistics, there's a huge amount of innovation there through technology. And that's all, you know, there's a lot of robots getting involved. There's a lot of, you know, logistics factories now are not warehouses at all. They're like, you know, they look that from the outside, but they're incredibly productive. For us, we're really at the moment just focusing on the office space piece. I think that there's a lot of innovation happening with those. And same way that office space lacks software, I think logistics does as well, retail does as well, hotels do, and all of that is having, you know, software brought into it and technology.
Culture trumps design. So why does someone choose to have a crappy workplace? Because the culture doesn't say this needs to be different. Why do people then choose to do something different? Because the culture is driving a new work environment. If you look at the idea of the Japanese automakers, Kaizen, it was the same factory line that the American car workers were using, but Kaizen was a cultural change that said anybody can raise their hand and go, there's a problem with this, and then people surround them, solve the problem, and go back to it. So that's using the same equipment with a different culture. And so I think it always comes down to the culture, and then the space will facilitate that or reflect it. It's never going to be the actual driver for innovation, in my humble opinion.
I think that's something actually with culture. All the comments made earlier that were about how people can work from home and they can be very productive, and that study you referred to, and I think in China, if people can work very effectively from home, that's great, but it does overlook culture, because you need a collective, you need a space that people can call home to really help foster culture, and culture is so incredibly important.
I don't think that has to be a physical space, though, necessarily.
I think it needs to be a combination. I think you have to have some element of physical space, because that just instinctively, I think people respond to physical interaction in a different way to a virtual.
For teams, I think for individuals, it's not as critical, and I think you're dealing with a lot of individuals.
I think you can build culture without meeting people. I think if you've got a purpose that people believe in and align with, and you select people on the basis of their alignment to that purpose, you build culture.
I think culture is a DNA piece as well. So for me, culture is a feeling. It's not just I think the hardest part with technology, whilst I love it and our business is awesome, so this is my personal opinion, we're all about AI and programmatic, but the reality is tech is taking away our ability to engage on a human level with people. So the culture piece becomes even more important, because we want to, you know, the mental health issues, for example, we want to connect with one another. You want to eyeball people. You want to be able to see whether there's an emotion sitting behind that emoticon, I feel.
Okay, thank you. Yes, lady over there.
This sounds amazing, but I think I'd like to know where the trickle-down effect is going to work for the people who actually who don't get a living wage, who are the people in the rest of the world who are living on $1 a day, who don't have access to technology, to people who are not using soft skills but real skills. who have a boss that says, you know, but you haven't completed X, Y, and Z. And that, to be honest, is most people. And also, in my experience, most people do not want the choice. They want to go into work, whatever that work is. If it's at home, there's a problem with that too, because if you've got kids, it's very difficult to work at home. And how this impacts on women and on what is an incredibly elite audience here is one thing that is marvelous. But how do you see that functioning in like 20 years from now? Your question has to be, actually, where is it going to be in 20 years from now? Even if you're wrong, where do you think it might be?
The evidence says that you are respectfully wrong about people don't want choice. Choice is an innate driver of the human condition. So people do want choice. What they want is they want an easier life. And so if they feel that the easy decision is to go into the office every day, or there's also inertia. If the inertia decision is to go into the office, and that's what they'll do. But when given the option to have a choice made for them or to make a choice, they will almost always choose to have that autonomy. That is a natural condition. But I think you make a very sound point, and something that I scratched the surface on before about what about the rest of the world? The rest of the world is at much, much greater risk of automation. And so while we're saying they have the hard skills are the ones that are going to be taken away most quickly. So we've got to start giving them the ability to focus on some of those soft skills as well. And I go back to, again, a universal basic income. For those environments where there are segments of the population who are able to produce at a very high level, then I think that wealth, I think some of the 1% wealth is frankly obscene. And that it's not helping us as global citizens at all. And I look around, and this is clearly a 1% environment.
Anyone else want to come in?
I agree, and from my perspective, I mentioned about socioeconomic diversity, and this isn't a company issue, this is a human issue. I think the biggest challenge we've got in a room like this, for example, if we're all from media, marketing, communications, is we do live in a little bit of a micro bubble, and there are people on the streets when we all leave this evening who have no concept of agile working, and it is a choice because actually they don't think about having choices because they don't know that there are choices to have. So I actually think organisations need to start looking at what we're doing for our community instead of thinking, what are we doing for our commercials? It has to be about how that pays back to the consumer, the client first. Obviously, it's always the client first, but the reality is it's the consumer who is using, who is not getting, for example, even food or drink. But I don't think that can be changed because even the automation piece, we need to empower these individuals. There need to be work forums for these people to be able to go and hear about changing shapes of tech, or to hear about the changing shape of farming, or vocations. People have forgotten the vocational roles. So that is huge, but I think the economy currently means that everyone focuses on them first. And unfortunately, that's created a really egocentric culture, just like tech has. So for me, that's a human issue that I think every individual needs to own, rather than it being a corporate ownership. I think we all have an ability to affect change with someone in our community who fits that criteria. But do we?
I think for some of the difficulties of millennials, as a group of people, I think they're socially conscious and have a good intent for it. And certainly, in the same way that they have a loud voice to complain about stuff, I think they also have a loud voice to say there's certain huge social issues in the world now, great inequality, global warming, these types of things. I think there is across millennial population a very not just wide acceptance of that, but a sense of responsibility that something really has to be done. So I think there's benefits that something like technology has, allowing people to kind of have that grouping of mind and making sure that people are certainly thinking about it, hopefully starting to take steps to do it. And then I think in other instances, like technology and mobile phones, for example, in Africa, have been tremendously helpful because they've opened up an ability to do things like banking. And that, without those capital markets, that was incredibly restrictive. So there's ways, it's a very, very powerful tool. And as long as it's driven and honed in the right way, there's great opportunity for it. But I think a greater social awareness does exist amongst millennials, and there needs to be much greater social awareness still but I think there's some improvement on that respect. It still needs to be enacted on.
Alex, you want to say anything? Or
I mean,
big issues.
Yeah, big issues, and I think we're really just at the start, aren't we, of understanding what's possible. I mean, we talk about being at the bleeding edge of kind of being able to work entirely remotely, and yet, you know, software that we use is still in beta. You know, it's not like this is ready for everyone. It's still early days, but the ability to connect people globally across time zones who have never met, but to task them towards solving a problem, whatever that problem is potentially revolutionary for our ability as humankind to evolve. Like, we could connect scientists and creatives and actors and psychologists to solve world problems in a way that we haven't been able to before, and that can only help every issue that we have if we can evolve it in the right way and treat each other properly.
I mean, that connected all those people as well. Sorry to stand up and interrupt you.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm saying. We're talking about the bit of a revolution, and it's time for the whole revolution.
I'll be there. I'll be your foot soldier, sister.
It's weird though, because when we were talking about the socioeconomic challenges, and I mentioned earlier that we're trying to get people into our workplace whose parents might never have worked, or might not have worked in a corporate environment, or in fact actually have just not been in employment. We're talking people who there is no minimum wage, there is way below this. And it's really interesting when we talk about agile working, because it's a privilege to a certain extent. I know it should be an entitlement for all of us. But what's interesting is when we extend it to them, we foolishly forget that they can't afford Wi-Fi, that they don't have the ability to sit in a home where there's heating, where there is food, where there is drink. So there's all of those factors that even that we take for granted. And it's sort of a wake-up call, which is why I believe everyone needs to pay it forward, as an individual as well as an organization.
And despite Trump, we can't forget the data. I'm an evidence girl. We live in by almost every metric you can imagine, the best time ever. People are healthier, they're living longer, their income levels are higher, their education levels are higher, but there is less crime, there's less violence, there's less what we are still. We continue to improve as a human race. The challenge is that if it is to my journalist friend, if it bleeds, it leads. And so the stuff that is the bad news travels really, really fast. And then when you've got an imbecile like President Trump tweeting all the time, it's very easy to forget that actually we do still live in an awe-filled, miraculous time to be alive. And I believe that wholeheartedly, and the evidence supports that as well.
I love that.
Yeah. Well, we've come a long way from the future of the office to solving world problems and President Trump and goodness knows what else. But anyway, fantastic tour d'horizon. I think we're out of time, are we not, Tass? Yeah, so lots of drinks though, yeah, so we can continue these multifaceted conversations over a glass of hopefully very decent red or white, courtesy of Midtown. So thank you very much, and I think some appreciation for the excellent panelists. Thank you. Thank you very much for coming.
Yeah, you too. It's a pleasure.